Welcome to Stories from the Front. Take a second to like, subscribe, and activate notifications. The caves of Tora Bora are labyrinths that I still wander through in my thoughts. Kevin Ellis, former Delta Force commander, in that December 2001 mission in Afghanistan, redefined everything I thought I knew about modern warfare. Every breath in that underground complex could have been the difference between life and death. Our team was made up of 12 highly trained men, each specialized in different aspects of combat. Martinez, our explosives expert, had an almost supernatural talent for detecting booby traps. Wilson, the sharpshooter, could hit targets in the dark guided only by instinct. Carson, our combat medic, carried not only medical supplies, but also the weight of our lives in his hands. The mission seemed clear from the briefing: infiltrate the cave complex in Tora Bora, where intelligence information indicated the presence of important Taliban leaders. But nothing prepared us for what we would find in those icy mountains. The first sign that something was wrong came when our local guide, Kareem, began to show signs of unusual nervousness. He knew these mountains like the back of his hand, but something was bothering him. "The caves have many secrets," he muttered in his garbled English, "some of which should remain buried." Our first night together was marked by a disturbing silence. The mountains seemed to swallow up every sound, creating a sense of absolute isolation. The thin air at high altitude made every movement a challenge, and the weight of the equipment seemed to double with every step. Martinez detected the first tunnel system after a grueling 6-hour hike. It was a complex network, much more elaborate than the intelligence reports had suggested. The entrances were well camouflaged, some so narrow that we had to crawl to get through. The communication system began to fail as soon as we entered deeper into the complex. The radio emitted only static, and our connection with Central Command became intermittent. Wilson, ever the pragmatist, suggested we establish a more elaborate hand signal protocol. It was during our first sweep that we found signs of recent activity. Remains of food, spent ammunition cartridges, and, most disturbingly, bloodstains that seemed to form a specific pattern on the rocky floor. Carson examined the stains and confirmed that they were recent, no more than a few hours old. The maze of tunnels branched off in dozens of different directions, and each choice of path could mean life or death. Kareem warned of old passages that the Soviets had used during their occupation, now reconverted by the Taliban into escape routes and ambush points. The tension reached its peak when we detected movement in one of the side tunnels. Training took over, and we automatically took up defensive positions. Through the night vision goggles, I identified 3 figures moving quickly. Wilson made a silent signal indicating that he had a clear target, but I ordered containment. Something didn't seem right. It was at that moment that we realized we were being watched. Not just by the enemies we were looking for, but by eyes hidden in the shadows, watchers who knew every inch of that place. The feeling of vulnerability was overwhelming, even for trained men like us. Martinez discovered the first improvised explosive device, IED, cleverly camouflaged in a narrow passage. His expertise saved us from a trap that could have sealed our fate in those depths. But that discovery revealed something else. Our enemies were more sophisticated than we expected. The next few hours turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse. Every advance was meticulously planned, every retreat strategically executed. The thick, dusty air made breathing difficult, and the distant echo of occasional gunshots reverberated through the tunnels, making it impossible to determine their origin. Carson treated our first injuries when 2 members of the team suffered deep cuts while passing through a particularly narrow crevice. It was a cruel reminder that even the environment was our enemy on that mission. The discovery of a hastily abandoned command center gave us hope that we were on the right track. Scattered documents and still warm communications equipment indicated that we had missed our targets by a matter of minutes. But that discovery also brought a disturbing revelation: detailed plans of the cave complex that showed a much larger extension than we had imagined. That first night in Tora Bora, as we established a safe perimeter to rest, I knew we were only scratching the surface of something much bigger. Kareem's worried look, the marks on the walls of the tunnels, The signs of recent movement all indicated that our mission would be far more complex than any of us could have anticipated. The war prepared us to face visible enemies, but in the caves of Tora Bora, we learned that sometimes the real danger lies in the shadows of the unknown. And that was just the first of many lessons those mountains would teach us. The next morning brought with it a disturbing revelation. As we examined the abandoned command center in more detail, Martinez found a series of detailed maps that showed a much more extensive network of tunnels than we had imagined. We weren't just dealing with natural caves, but a meticulously planned underground military complex. "Boss, you need to see this," Martinez called out, pointing to specific markings on the maps. The annotations in Pashtun, translated by Kareem, revealed the existence of storage chambers, dormitories, and, most worryingly, a facility that appeared to be an advanced communication center. Wilson, who kept watch from an elevated position, signaled movement about 200 meters away. Through his scope, he identified a group of 3 Taliban fighters moving quickly between the cave entrances. They were carrying equipment and looked hurried, as if they were evacuating something important. Carson took advantage of the momentary pause to check our medical supplies. The thin air and humidity in the caves was affecting some of the team, causing headaches and mild disorientation. "We need to monitor this closely," he warned. "The altitude could become our worst enemy." We decided to split into 3 4-man teams to cover more ground. I led the first group with Martinez, Carson, and Kareem. Wilson commanded the second, and our Sergeant Peterson the third. We established meeting points and specific times to check in via radio, even though communication was precarious. As we moved deeper into the complex, the passages became more structured, with metal supports and rudimentary electrical installations. At some points, we found silent generators, still warm, showing recent use. Martinez disarmed 2 more traps, one of them particularly sophisticated, using motion sensors. It was during one of these sweeps that we heard the first distant gunshot. The sound reverberated through the tunnels, making it impossible to pinpoint its exact origin. We immediately activated our emergency communication protocol. Wilson's group had made contact with a heavily armed enemy unit. 5 Tangos, heavy weaponry, Wilson reported over the radio between bursts of gunfire. "They're protecting something important." The static cut off his words, but the urgency in his voice was clear. Navigating the tunnels towards Wilson's position, we found evidence of a layered defense system. Each corridor had defensive positions prepared, with overlapping firing ranges. Our enemies knew the terrain well and had prepared for a possible invasion. Kareem warned of an alternative passage that could lead us to the rear of the enemy position. It was a narrow, partially collapsed tunnel that the Soviets had used decades ago. The decision to use it was risky. It could be a trap, or we could get stuck, but it was our best chance of supporting Wilson's team. The tunnel was claustrophobic, with just enough space for us to crawl through one at a time. Air was so scarce that we had to take frequent breaks to catch our breath. Carson constantly monitored our condition, worried about the effects of confinement and low oxygen. After 20 agonizing minutes, we emerged into a larger chamber, precisely behind a position where the Taliban fighters had cornered Wilson's team. The element of surprise allowed us to quickly reverse the situation. The confrontation was brief but intense, and when the dust had settled, we had secured the area. The chamber they defended so fiercely revealed the reason for their resistance. It was a complete command and control center, with modern communications equipment and documents that seemed crucial. Wilson had lost 1 man in the initial firefight, and 2 others were wounded, but alive thanks to Carson's quick intervention. Peterson and his team arrived minutes later, reporting that they had found a cache of medical supplies and ammunition. More importantly, they discovered evidence that important Taliban leaders had been there recently, possibly including some of our main targets. While Carson treated the wounded, Martinez and I began to examine the documents found. Kareem translated quickly, revealing information about escape routes, meeting places, and, most disturbingly, plans for future attacks. It was a goldmine of intelligence, but also a grim reminder of what was at stake. Night was approaching, and with it the need to make difficult decisions. We had wounded to evacuate, critical information to protect, and an enemy that was certainly regrouping. The Tora caves still held many secrets, and we knew that the real challenge was just beginning. With the documents seized and the wounded stabilized, our mission took on a new urgency. The information uncovered pointed to a secret bunker, even deeper in the complex, where we suspected the Taliban leaders might be hiding. The loss of one of our own weighed heavily on every decision. Thompson was a good soldier, leaving a wife and 2 children at home. Carson had done everything he could, but the wound was too serious. We decided that Peterson would escort the wounded back to the surface, where a helicopter would rescue them, while the rest of us continued the mission. These tunnels have been expanded recently, observed Kareem, analyzing the marks on the walls. Professional work, not the work of amateur guerrillas. Martinez agreed, noting the excavation patterns and the makeshift but efficient ventilation system. Wilson, still shaken by the loss of his man, remained focused. His sniper training would be crucial in the narrow passages that awaited us. "They know every inch of this place," he muttered, "but we have the advantage of surprise. They don't expect us to keep advancing after the confrontation." The maps indicated a series of interconnected chambers about 300 meters below our current position. The way there was a tactical nightmare. Zigzag tunnels, natural choke points, and various intersections that could hide ambushes. Martinez kept finding and disarming increasingly sophisticated devices. "They're using technology they shouldn't have," he commented, showing me advanced electronic components from a detonator. "Someone is supplying them with first-rate material." Our progress was methodical and exhausting. The air became denser as we descended, and the ventilation system began to fail at some points. Carson handed out masks with filters, concerned about the air quality and possible toxic gases. We found the first real sign of our proximity to something important when Wilson spotted camouflage security cameras. They were small and well hidden, but his training detected them. Martinez silently deactivated them, but we knew that our presence could already have been noticed. "Movement ahead," signaled Wilson, who was leading our formation. Through the night vision goggles, we identified 4 combatants moving heavy equipment. They seemed to be evacuating something important. The ensuing confrontation was swift and precise. Our experience and superior training made the difference. Wilson eliminated 2 sentries with silent gunfire, while Martinez and I neutralized the others. Carson ensured that there were no unnecessary casualties. The equipment they were carrying turned out to be crucial. They were computer servers and hard disks. "They're erasing traces," Martinez concluded, examining the components. Some were still warm, indicating recent use. Kareem translated documents found with the downed fighters, revealing information about a secondary escape route that didn't appear on previous maps. "It's an old tunnel," he explained, used during the war against the Soviets. "It leads to a valley on the other side of the mountain." The decision was clear: split up the team again. Martinez and 2 men would stay to dry out and examine the servers, while I, Wilson, Carson, and Kareem would chase the fugitives through the secret passage. Time was crucial. Every minute of delay meant more distance between us and our targets. The escape tunnel was different from the others, more primitive and unstable. Old wooden beams groaned under the weight of the mountain, and the uneven floor made our progress difficult. Carson kept a close eye on our oxygen levels, worried about how deep we were. "They passed this way earlier," whispered Kareem, pointing to fresh marks on the dusty ground. Wilson confirmed it, noticing other signs: cigarette but still smoking, marks of dragged equipment. The tunnel gradually began to rise, and a slight breath of fresh air indicated that we were approaching an exit. Our adrenaline was pumping with every step, knowing that we were close to our goals. But experience has taught us that the final moments of a chase are always the most dangerous. A subtle noise caught my attention, the almost imperceptible sound of a stone moving. Wilson noticed it too and immediately signaled for us to take cover. Seconds later, the first shot cut through the air where we were standing. The ambush had been well planned, but our reflexes and training kept us alive. The confrontation that followed would change not only the course of our mission, but our understanding of the entire operation in Tora Bora. The confrontation in the escape tunnel quickly turned into a tactical nightmare. We were trapped between the rocky wall and a heavily armed group that knew every inch of the terrain. The echo of gunfire reverberated deafeningly, making it impossible to determine the exact number of enemies. 3 targets, 2 o'clock position, shouted Wilson, as he took cover behind a rocky ledge. His sniper rifle, normally lethal at long distances, now had to adapt to close combat in the confines of the tunnel. Carson crawled to my position, carrying his medical bag. "Kevin, we need to pull back. The air here is getting toxic." The smoke from the gunfire, mixed with the already thin air, created a suffocating atmosphere. Kareem, our guide, was coughing violently as he tried to hold his position. It was then that I noticed something peculiar about the pattern of enemy gunfire. They weren't just trying to contain us, they were leading us somewhere. Years of combat experience warned me. It was an elaborate trap. "Martinez, Comin." I called over the radio, trying to contact the team that had fallen behind. Only static. Our last communication with them had been 20 minutes ago, when they reported finding something significant on the C servers. A controlled explosion shook the tunnel, bringing fragments of the ceiling down on us. Wilson reacted instantly, taking out a fighter who was trying to flank our position. "They've got American night vision equipment," he warned, identifying the device on the downed enemy. Carson began treating a deep cut on Kareem's arm, caused by shrapnel from the explosion. "Keep pressure here," he instructed, as he prepared a makeshift tourniquet. Even under intense fire, his hands remained steady, the result of countless similar situations. "There's another passage." Kareem signaled between coughing fits. "An old route used for ventilation. It could lead us to the surface." It was risky to split up the team, but our options were limited. I made a quick decision. Wilson and I would hold the position, providing cover while Carson and Kareem searched for the alternative route. If they found a viable exit, we could flank the attackers or at the very least secure an escape route. The next few minutes were a test of endurance and discipline. Wilson and I alternated between conserving ammunition and maintaining enough pressure to stop the enemy advance. The air became heavier and heavier, and my vision began to blur at the edges. "Movement," Wilson warned, spotting more fighters approaching. But something was different. They were moving with a discipline we hadn't seen before. "These are no ordinary Taliban," Wilson muttered, "professional training." Through the night vision system, I observed their coordinated movements and advanced equipment. These were special forces, possibly mercenaries or foreign operatives. The mission had just become significantly more complicated. The radio crackled with Carson's urgent voice. "We've found the exit, but there's something you need to see. It's bigger than we imagined." His voice carried a mixture of astonishment and concern that he rarely showed. Just then, a new explosion, bigger than the previous one, shook the entire structure of the tunnel. Rocks began to fall, and the sound of writhing metal echoed through the passages. Wilson and I were forced to retreat, jumping from roof to roof as the tunnel began to collapse. "They're sealing the passages," I shouted, realizing the enemy's plan. They didn't want to kill us. They wanted to bury us alive with whatever they were protecting. We ran towards Carson and Kareem's position, the tunnel collapsing behind us. The air was so thick that breathing became a constant struggle. Wilson stumbled, and I pulled him up by his tactical vest, dragging him with me as we continued our desperate escape. We finally reached our companions, only to understand why Carson was so astonished. The exit gave access to a gigantic chamber, clearly artificial, full of sophisticated equipment and cargo containers. It was a complete military installation, hidden in the bowels of the mountain. "This isn't on any of our maps," Kareem observed, his voice betraying concern. "Not even in the Soviet records." As we quickly examined the chamber, looking for escape routes and assessing the resources available, a disturbing reality began to form. Tora Bora wasn't just a Taliban hideout. It was something much bigger, much more organized. The distant sound of more explosions reminded us that time was running out. We needed to make quick decisions, and each choice could mean the difference between completing our mission or joining the secrets buried in those mountains. The gigantic chamber we discovered in the depths of Tora, Bora, revealed an operation far beyond what we had expected to find. As we quickly examined the site, each discovery increased our concern about the true nature of our mission. "Kevin, look at this," Carson called out, pointing to a series of containers marked in different languages: Russian, Mandarin, and even characters that looked North Korean. Wilson was frantically photographing every detail with his tactical camera while I tried to process the magnitude of what we were witnessing. "These are components for advanced weapons," explained Kareem, translating some of the markings. "Guidance systems, specialized electronic circuits." His voice shook slightly. "This is not the work of the ordinary Taliban." The sound of more explosions in the upper tunnels reminded us of our precarious situation. We were isolated, with no communication with command and limited resources. The air was still thick, and Carson warned about oxygen levels. "We need to document everything we can and find a way out," I ordered, splitting up the team. Wilson and Carson started mapping out possible escape routes, while Kareem and I collected crucial documents. It was then that we found something even more disturbing: an intact communications room with state-of-the-art equipment. On one of the monitors that was still working, coordinates and codes flashed in sequence. "They're rendezvous points," muttered Kareem, deciphering quickly. "And dates, planning for future operations." His hands were shaking as he continued translating. "This goes far beyond Afghanistan." Wilson returned with urgent news. "We found a possible way out, but there's movement up there. Many of them, well-equipped." His face was covered in sweat and dust. "And there's more. We found evidence of tunnels leading into Pakistan." The realization hit us like a punch. Tora Bora wasn't just a hideout, it was an international operations center. The leaders we were chasing were just pieces in a much bigger game. Carson returned carrying something he'd found in one of the adjoining rooms: detailed blueprints of American military installations. "Some of these documents are recent," he said, his voice laden with concern. "Someone is providing updated information." Time was running out. More explosions were shaking the structure, and dust was constantly falling from the ceiling. We had to make a decision: try to escape with what we had already discovered, or continue exploring in search of more evidence. "There's something here," called out Wilson, who had found a locked door with an electronic security system. Martinez would have broken the code in minutes, but he was somewhere in the upper tunnels, possibly isolated by the explosions. Kareem examined the panel for a moment. "I can try. I know some of the old codes." His fingers flew over the keypad, and after 3 tries, the door opened with a hiss. What we found inside chilled our blood. A room full of servers and workstations, all dedicated to planning global terrorist operations. Maps on the walls showed targets on 3 continents, with dates and operational details meticulously planned. "We need to warn command," said Carson, but our radios were still dead. The mountain and the electronic jamming systems effectively kept us isolated from the outside world. Wilson, ever practical, began copying data from the computers onto portable drives, while Carson and I collected crucial physical documents. Kareem continued translating rapidly, identifying the most important information. A new series of explosions closer now forced us to speed up. The enemy plan was clear. They were methodically sealing off each level of the facility, trying to bury not only us, but all the evidence we had uncovered. "We have minutes, not hours," Carson warned, monitoring the vibrations in the walls. Our only hope was the escape route that Wilson had identified, but we would have to fight to reach it. As we prepared our retreat, one last discovery gave us pause: a detailed map showing a network of similar facilities scattered throughout the region. Tora Bora was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle, and what we had discovered could change the entire course of the war. With time running out and the air becoming increasingly thin, we began our escape attempt. What we would find on the way to the surface, and who exactly our mysterious adversaries were questions that would have to wait. Our priority now was to survive to tell the story. Our escape through the bowels of Tora Bora turned into a desperate race against time. The discoveries we had made in the secret facility weighed as much as our equipment as we advanced through the increasingly unstable tunnels. "Movement up," signaled Wilson, who was leading our formation. Through the night vision goggles, I spotted at least 6 well-equipped fighters blocking our escape route. They were no ordinary guerrillas. Their coordinated movements and sophisticated equipment indicated special training. Carson stayed close, monitoring our physical condition. The thin air and exhaustion were beginning to take their toll. Kareem, despite his injured arm, continued to guide us with unwavering determination through the underground labyrinth. "There's an old fork around here," whispered Kareem, his voice hoarse from the dust. "The Soviets used it as an emergency route." We followed his lead, aware that every decision could mean life or death. The sound of more controlled explosions echoed through the tunnels, making the mountain shake. Our pursuers were methodically sealing off all the exits, determined to bury not only us, but also the evidence we had uncovered about their global operation. "Kevin, we need to make contact with command," Carson urged, checking our dead radios once again. The data we were carrying, the plans for future attacks, the network of secret installations, the international connections, was too crucial to be lost in the depths of Tora Bora. An intense firefight erupted in front of us. Between the echoes of the shots, I recognized Martinez's voice. He and his team had survived and were engaged with the enemy somewhere nearby. 3 levels up, Wilson signaled, pointing to a makeshift ladder that climbed up through a vertical shaft. It was our best chance to regroup with Martinez and find a way out. The climb was agonizing. Every move had to be calculated, as the slightest noise could give away our position. The weight of the stolen documents and drives seemed to multiply with every step, but we couldn't abandon that vital evidence. We reached Martinez and his men in the middle of a tactical stalemate. They had entrenched themselves in a natural defensive position, keeping the attackers at bay. "We found something big down there," Martinez reported between bursts. "Data on sleeper cells in American territory." The situation was critical. We were surrounded, with limited ammunition and scarce air. The explosions continued, methodically sealing off tunnel after tunnel. Our window of escape was shrinking by the minute. It was Kareem who offered our last hope. "There's a natural crack in the rock," he explained quickly. "It leads to a cave system that the local shepherds use. If we reach it, we can emerge on the Pakistani side of the border." The decision was risky. If the information was wrong, we'd be stuck with no way out. But our options were limited, and time was running out. Wilson Martinez set up a suppression line. I ordered, "Carson, prepare the wounded for rapid movement. We'll do it in a single strike." What followed was one of the most intense moments of my military career. Under heavy fire, we coordinated our retreat through the gap indicated by Kareem. Wilson and Martinez provided masterful cover, while Carson ensured that no one was left behind. The passage was so narrow that we had to crawl at some points, carrying our precious load of intelligence. The air became cleaner as we advanced, a promising sign that we were approaching the surface. After what seemed like an eternity, we emerged into a small natural cave. Dawn light filtered through an opening above, and the fresh air had never been so welcome. We made contact with command as soon as we reached the surface. A helicopter was dispatched for our extraction, while intelligence teams were already preparing to process the information we had recovered. Looking back at the mountains that had almost become our tomb, I realized the true scale of what we had discovered. Tora Bora was not just a Taliban hideout. It was a nexus of global terrorist operations, a sophisticated command center that defied everything we thought we knew about our enemies. The information we recovered on that mission led to dozens of subsequent operations, dismantling terrorist cells and preventing planned attacks. But it also revealed a disturbing truth about the complexity and scope of our threats. 22 years later, I still wake up occasionally remembering those moments in the depths of Tora Bora. The faces of my companions, Kareem's courage, the decisions we made, everything remains vivid in my memory. Some of the secrets of those mountains remain buried to this day, sealed by the explosives of our mysterious adversaries. But what we brought to light changed our understanding of the conflict and reminded us that in war, as in life, the truth is often more complex and disturbing than we imagine.